For years, similar stories began to surface in forums, neighborhood groups, and private conversations. They didn't come from the same building, nor from the same city, but they all had something in common: ordinary apartments, shared walls, and sounds no one could fully explain. The first account came from a man who lived alone in an old building downtown. He said he had never had problems with noise, always slept deeply, but everything changed after a renovation in the apartment next door. According to him, the new neighbor was almost never seen, received no visitors, made no noise during the day, but at night, things were different. The man said the sounds always began the same way: light footsteps, almost dragging, moving from one room to another. Not hurried, not chaotic. What caught his attention was the regularity. Every night, the footsteps began around midnight and ended shortly after 3 in the morning. Never before, never after. He tried to ignore it for weeks, until the night he woke up to something new: knocks on the wall. They weren't angry knocks, nor loud bangs. They were soft, controlled. 3 knocks, a pause far too long to be normal. Then 3 more. He said he lay still, trying to understand if it was real or if he was dreaming. The knocking stopped. The next day, he left a polite note for the neighbor, asking for silence during the night. He never got a reply. A few days later, the footsteps returned, but this time closer to the wall. And then came something he took weeks to tell anyone. Between the knocks, he heard something like breathing, as if someone was leaning against the other side of the wall. He moved out 2 months later. The second account came from a woman who lived in a newer building in another neighborhood. She said she never heard footsteps, nor knocks. Her problem was different. She began to hear voices, very faint, so faint that at first she thought they came from the street. But the voices had no clear words, and they always seemed to come from the same place: the bedroom wall. She described it as a continuous murmur, like someone speaking behind a closed door. When she pressed her ear to the wall, the sound grew sharper, but still impossible to understand. Until the night she recognized a word: her own name. She said she felt an immediate chill in her stomach, not because she heard something frightening, but because the voice sounded familiar, as if it were imitating someone she knew. She began sleeping with headphones. Even so, sometimes she woke with the sensation that someone had spoken right next to her ear. She moved out after waking one night with the clear impression that someone was on the other side of the wall, responding to her own thoughts. A third account came from a couple. They had just moved into a small apartment, newlyweds, excited about their new life. The first weeks were normal, until they began hearing what they described as repeated movement, always at the same time, always the same path. Something went from the living room to the bedroom next door, stopped, and went back. The couple tried speaking with the building manager. They discovered the apartment next door had been empty for almost a year. The last tenant had died there. Cause of death? Natural. Even so, the sounds continued. The strangest detail came from the husband's account. He said that one night, while his wife slept, he decided to knock on the wall, just once. Seconds later, he heard the knock back, in the same spot, with the same force. He never did it again. Another account came from a student who shared an apartment with friends. He said everyone complained about noise coming from the floor above, but there was a problem. The apartment upstairs was sealed.
The rental agency confirmed no one had lived there for months. Even so, they heard furniture being dragged, something falling to the floor, heavy footsteps, until the night the student clearly heard something fall and roll, like a small object. The next day, he found a strange item in the hallway, leaning against his apartment door. A marble. He swore no one in the house owned one. As more accounts surfaced, a pattern began to form. The sounds almost always happened after midnight, almost always stopped around 3. Many mentioned knocks, others voices, some only the sensation of a presence. And there was one detail that appeared often enough to be disturbing. Several people said that when they tried to record the sounds, the audio came out empty, or with interference.
As if the noise wasn't really there. One of the most unsettling accounts came from a man who worked nights. Because he stayed awake, he was sure he wasn't dreaming. He said the footsteps began suddenly, without reason. One night, he decided to speak out loud toward the wall. He said something simple. "Can you stop?" According to him, there was absolute silence for a few seconds. Then, a response. Not in clear words, but in tone. As if someone had tried to imitate human speech without knowing exactly how. After that, the sounds never returned, but he said that since that night, he feels he no longer lives alone, even in different apartments. Some accounts mention strange dreams.
Residents who began dreaming of long corridors, thin walls, doors that never opened completely, people on the other side who seemed to be listening. One specific account mentions a curious detail. The person dreamed they were trapped inside the wall, hearing their own home from the other side. None of these stories were ever officially investigated. None generated police reports. None made the news. Because alone, they seemed too small, easy to explain as stress, insomnia, imagination. But when gathered together, it becomes hard to ignore that something strange happens in certain places, especially where people live very close, separated only by thin walls. Maybe it's just the human brain trying to make sense of ordinary sounds. Or maybe it's something that doesn't quite understand what it means to be alive, but still tries to communicate. Either way, if you live in an apartment and hear something after midnight, it might be better not to answer.
There is a silent consensus among people who work late in the city. After a certain hour, public transportation changes. Not officially, not in schedules or on signs, but in atmosphere. Stations grow emptier, train cars quieter. People avoid eye contact. It was in this context that strange reports began to appear, scattered over the years, from different cities, but disturbingly similar. The first came from a night watchman who relied on the subway to get home. He worked long shifts, almost always leaving after midnight. He said he knew the last train of the line well, knew the few faces that usually appeared at that hour. According to him, there was an unspoken rule. Whoever boarded the last train never spoke to anyone. One ordinary night, he entered the car and noticed it was emptier than usual. Only 3 people. A woman sitting near the door, an older man leaning in the corner, and another figure farther back. That last one didn't draw attention at first. Dark hood, head lowered.
The train began to move. At the first station, the woman got off. At the second, the older man. After that, only 2 remained. The watchman said that from that moment, he began to feel something strange. Not fear exactly, but the sense that he shouldn't be there. At the next station, he glanced discreetly behind him. The figure in the back seemed closer. He didn't remember seeing it move. He tried to convince himself he was tired, but station after station, the distance shrank. When the train entered a longer stretch of tunnel, the watchman heard a voice, low, calm. "Do you stay until the end, too?" He didn't answer. At the next station, he got off, even though it wasn't his. The train continued on. The next day, he learned that train had been taken out of service for a few hours. A worker was found unconscious inside an empty car. No official explanation was given. Another account came from a university student. She lived far from campus and commuted by subway almost every night, always at the same time, always on the same line. She said she began to notice something strange after a few months. Some people seemed always to be there, no matter the day, no matter the station. One man in particular caught her attention. He always boarded after her, always stood, always held the same rail, never got off before the last station. She never saw him leave. At first, she thought it was coincidence. Then, she began to watch more closely. She noticed the man never changed expression, never looked tired, never used a phone. He just stood there. One night, out of curiosity, she decided not to get off at her usual stop. She stayed seated, watching. The man remained standing. When the train reached the end of the line, she was the only one to leave. She looked back. The car was empty, except for the man. He was sitting now, watching. She never returned at that hour again. Over time, similar reports began to appear, even from system employees. One train operator said there were nights when the number of passengers didn't match the number of people seen leaving. According to him, on more than one occasion, he counted 3 or 4 people boarding the last train and saw only 2 get off at the end. He assumed human error, but began to take notes. For weeks, he noticed the same pattern, always a difference of 1, never 2, never 0, always 1. When he asked a supervisor, he received a short reply, "It's not worth dwelling on that." After that, he requested a shift transfer. One of the longest accounts came from a man who worked as a night janitor in a large station. He was responsible for cleaning platforms after the last train passed. He said there was one detail that always bothered him. Even after the last train, he heard footsteps coming from the tunnel. At first, he thought it was another worker or some operational delay, but the footsteps never fully approached. They always stopped at the same distance. He described them as footsteps of someone walking without hurry, without clear intent. One night, he called out loudly. No response. But the footsteps changed. They began to follow his movements. When he walked left, they moved too. When he stopped, they stopped. He never saw anyone.
there were never images on the cameras. After a few months, he quit. He said he began to dream he was trapped inside the tunnel, watching trains pass, never able to climb out. Another curious pattern emerged among the reports. Many mentioned clocks, phones that lagged, wristwatches that stopped momentarily, always at the same time, between 1 and 3 in the morning. One passenger said that while on the last bus of the line, he noticed the panel showed an impossible time. The bus kept moving, but time didn't advance. He watched for several minutes. The clock didn't change. When the bus finally stopped at the last stop, the clock resumed, as if nothing had happened. There were also reports of conversations, brief, strange. One man said someone sat beside him and asked casually, "Do you get off before or after?" He found the question odd and answered, "Before."
The person simply nodded, got off at the next station, but the man was certain that person hadn't been on the train when he boarded. Perhaps the most disturbing account came from a woman who dozed off during the ride. She woke with the train stopped. The lights were dimmer, the doors closed. She didn't recognize the station. According to her, there were other people in the car, but all were completely silent, still. The train resumed without warning. When she finally got off, she was at the end of the line, alone. Employees swore the train hadn't stopped between stations that night. None of these accounts alone prove anything. All can be explained by fatigue, night routine, memory lapses. But when gathered, they suggest something unsettling, that perhaps public transport at night is not just a means of travel, but also a space of transition, a place where not everyone is going home. Some may just be staying until the end.
There is a silent rule among people who drive at night. After a certain hour, you don't stop, no matter the reason, no matter who is on the shoulder. The city fades behind, the lights dim, and the road becomes something else. It was from reports by different drivers in different places that this story began to take shape. The first testimony came from a rideshare driver who had worked nights for years. He said he liked the night shift because it was calmer, less traffic, fewer drunk passengers. But there was one stretch he always avoided when he could. A long avenue, almost an urban highway, connecting two large neighborhoods. On one side, closed warehouses. On the other, empty land stretching for miles. According to him, it wasn't the place that bothered him. It was what appeared there after midnight. He said that on several different nights, he saw the same thing. A person walking along the shoulder. Always alone, always in the same stretch, always in the same direction. They didn't seem to ask for help, didn't raise a hand, just walked. The strange detail was the rhythm. He said the person walked too fast to seem tired, but too slow to seem in a hurry, as if they were just following. He ignored it the first few times, until the night he passed that person and saw them again a few minutes later, in the same place. Another account came from a delivery driver making long trips between nearby cities. He usually left around 1 in the morning and drove on nearly empty roads. One night, he saw someone standing on the shoulder. It was a woman. She wore light clothing, hair loose. He slowed down instinctively, thought she might need help. As he approached, he noticed something strange. She was facing away, motionless, didn't react to the sound of the car, didn't turn. He drove past. Minutes later, a chill ran through him. He looked in the rearview mirror. The woman was gone. But a few miles ahead, he saw someone again on the shoulder. Same clothes, same posture, facing away. He sped up. He said that night he felt not watched, but accompanied. Over time, similar reports began to appear in trucker forums and road groups. People describing solitary figures walking at night, always on the shoulder, always silent. Some said the figures seemed to change position too quickly. Others swore that even when accelerating, they could never fully leave them behind. An older trucker told something that stood out. He said that on more than one occasion, he saw someone walking, but with no visible movement of the legs, as if the person simply glided. He didn't stop to confirm. He said some things don't need explanation. One of the longest accounts came from a man returning from work in another city. It was almost 3 in the morning. The road was empty. No cars ahead, no cars behind. He said the isolation was so intense, he began talking to himself to stay alert. That's when he saw someone ahead, a dark silhouette walking slowly along the shoulder. He slowed down. The moment his headlights lit the figure more clearly, he noticed something wrong. The person cast no shadow. One of the most disturbing accounts came from a woman driving alone at night. She said that at a certain point on the road, she began to hear something. Light tapping, as if someone were touching the car window. Not constant, not strong, spaced knocks. She said that when she looked to the side, no one was there, but the tapping continued. Only when she sped far above the limit did the sound stop. Later, at home, she noticed something strange. Light marks on the side window, like finger marks. Some reports mention recurring dreams after these experiences. Drivers who began to dream they were driving, but never arriving anywhere. The road stretched endlessly, and on the shoulder, someone was always walking, never approaching, never falling behind, just keeping the same pace. Perhaps the most unsettling account came from a young man who decided to stop. He said he had always heard these stories and never believed them. One night, he saw someone walking on the shoulder. He stopped the car a few meters ahead, got out, called out. The figure didn't respond. When he turned back to the car, he heard footsteps behind him, footsteps that matched his exactly. He got into the car without looking back, never told anyone what he saw after that. Only said that sometimes, when driving at night, he still feels someone walking alongside the car, even on lit streets. None of these reports prove anything. All can be explained by fatigue, night illusions, road routine. But there is something strange when stories so similar come from people who never met. Maybe it's just the human brain trying to fill the emptiness of the road. Or maybe there are things that don't belong exactly anywhere and use the roads to move. Whatever it is, if you're driving at night and see someone walking on the shoulder, it might be better not to stop. And most of all, don't look for too long.